Hello, and welcome back to the Writers Craft Summit. In this session, I'm speaking with USA Today best-selling author Megan Linsky. Megan, welcome to the summit.
Hi, Kevin. I'm glad to be here.
So, in addition to being an author of many books, how many books do you have out now?
I think I'm approaching 40 the last time
Oh
I
my
counted.
God, amazing. Incredible. In addition to all that writing and publishing, you're also an editor and you edited my novel, M School. So I'm always thrilled to get collaborators, people I've worked with in the past on the summit. So I'm so thrilled to have you here as someone who's worked on one of my books.
Yeah, I really enjoyed working with you, and I enjoyed our interview last time, so I'm happy to be back talking to you again.
Fantastic. Well, in today's session, we're going to dig into the concept of characters and creating complex characters. So, maybe to kick things off, you could give me some general thoughts on your approach to character and maybe the process you go through when you're starting to think about developing a book and the role that character development plays in that thinking process.
Well, to me, characterization is the most important part of your novel. It will make or break your novel. It comes before plot, setting, and it comes before story. So if you want to have a best-selling novel, or if you want to be able to really, hit people and really have them get an attachment to your work, you want to have great characterization. That's number one when it comes to your writing. And as far as I'm concerned, if you want to make great characters, you have to make them approachable, likable people with their own personalities, thoughts, dreams, everything as complex as a regular human being would be in our world today.
And do you think the reason character is such an important component of publishing success is because, I mean, one assumes it has something to do with the reader's personal connection to the characters. Would that be your argument there, that people get attached more to characters than they do to a series of plot events?
Absolutely. I would agree with that 100% because there's so many stories out there that are very similar in plot and story structure, and they have some of the same events take place in their novels. But what makes the difference to readers is the characters. People want to get attached to characters. They want to be in the character's shoes. They want a hero. They want a villain they can love to hate. They want to, be involved in this world and have these characters become their best friends and their greatest enemies.
That's so funny. It makes me think of when I was in my final years of high school, mostly more so in university, I think. But
Mhm.
I never took any courses in university on Tuesday nights because that was Buffy Angel Night. And I always thought of like the characters on that show as being like, I had my real life group of friends, and then I had like my like Tuesday night TV friends. And it's so true. It's like you develop those personal relationships
Mhm.
with these fictional characters in a really crazy way.
Of course, and that's why fan fiction is so popular. People want to spend more time with these characters. That's why long books, long series, long TV shows, those are why people love to connect with characters. It's just you want to have people in your life that you know are always going to be there for you in a way that, normal people can't be in regular life because people do make mistakes. Everyone messes up. But fictional people, they provide an area for a reader to escape. And that's why sometimes when a reader, a character does something bad in a novel that the reader doesn't agree with, they get angry and they have this emotional connection to this character that, may or not be right for the novel plot or whatever. It doesn't matter. But if you want to be a great author, your job is to forge that connection between reader and character.
It's so interesting because as you were saying that, I was thinking about the fact that the X-Files was my favorite TV series my entire life, and their last season came out last year, and I haven't watched like the last 4 episodes because I don't want it to be over. I was like, these
Right.
characters have been with me since I was a child, and I don't want that story to end. And so I keep pushing off watching
Mhm.
those episodes because I don't want them to go away. That's so interesting. So when you are sitting down to write one of your books, what is your process for starting to think about character? I know there's people who work through character sheets and have different templates and methodologies. How do you start thinking about character?
I do it a little different than most people. I don't really like doing character sheets or anything like that because I feel like it's too rigid and it provides, too much of a cage around my mind. I want to be creative. When you sit down and you talk to a normal person in, your day-to-day life, do you take out a bracket or a sheet and be like, okay, Bob loves, tacos. That's his, thing. You don't do that. You sit down and you talk to them and get to know them. So when I'm trying to develop a plot and trying to develop my characterization, I try and sit down and I imagine these people in my head and I visualize what they would be like, what they would do to their day-to-day basis, how they would react, and then I prompt them to have a conversation with me. And people, it's like, oh, that's crazy. You're talking to voices in your head. And it's like, no, I am taking a part of my subconscious that I don't know is there and communicating with them to bring out a different part of my personality and a different, persona in order to put them into my novel. So if you want to approach your character to bring them to, I would say treating them as if they are an actual normal person and not just a person on paper.
I like that idea you touched on there, that you're drawing from different aspects of your psyche. Would you
Mhm.
say that's true for all your characters? Because I know I sometimes struggle. I've
Yeah.
been asked the question, which character in this book do you most relate to? And I'm like, they're all me and none of them are me. They all come from within me and yet all feel different from myself. Do you feel that same way?
I do feel that way, but I would say that my characters aren't all me at the same time that they do come from, my subconscious. Some of them are more like me than others, but it's surprising because some of my characters have very, very different opinions than I would. And they're willing to take a stand and disagree with me on some things. Some of them like different music that I can't stand it. Some of them like shows that I think are boring. It's like, so interesting when you view them as, a friend or someone you actually communicate with versus, okay, this is a person that I'm using as a tool for my plot device. It's not like a real thing. You have to really imagine that what you're doing is real and then translate that realness onto paper.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
So you primarily write fantasy fiction, right? Or urban fantasy? Is
Right.
that correct?
I write young adult. It's kind of like a transition between paranormal and fantasy because I dabble in fantasy a bit, but now I'm getting into contemporary fantasy, which is modern day fantasy basically. So that's where I'm at right now.
And so the question I wanted to ask along those lines is, what role does genre play in creating characters? Do you think the way an author creates or develops or uses characters in, say, a YA fantasy is going to be different than in a historical fiction or a sci-fi, or are there consistencies from one genre to the other?
I think that there's definitely differences. You want to follow tropes. In a YA, you want to have, the dark bad boy if you're planning a romance. If you're, doing a sci-fi, you usually want the toughened general who like runs the spaceship. You want like these trophy characters, but at the same time, there's consistency across all genres as if when your main character comes on stage, you want them to be likable. You don't want people to be like, oh, well, I don't like him. He's a jerk. And if he is a jerk, you want to make him a likable jerk. You want to make sure he's someone who's interesting, who takes a stand, and who is willing to do action and drive forward and not just sit around and let things in the plot happen to them. And that is so crucially important because readers want to see characters who go out and do things. They don't want to sit around and wait for the plot to happen to them. So.
Absolutely. So we were titling this discussion "Creating Complex Characters." How would you define a complex character as opposed to, say, a more two-dimensional character or less complex character? And do we need both types of characters in our novels?
To me, I want to have as complex characters as possible, and this includes characters that are side characters, not just the main, group that you have. I want everybody to have their own personality and their distinguishable, persona. When they come on scene, the reader automatically goes, "Oh, I know who that is because they did this thing in chapter 1." Even if they're only on, quote unquote stage for, a page or so or a couple of lines, I want people to be able to remember them. like that just because of something that they did that sticks out in your mind. So when you're creating characters that are complex, what I mean by that is that they have a backstory. They have their own personality that's different from everyone else. They have their genuine look that's not the same as everyone else. They have motives. They have reasons for what they're doing. They have a goal in the novel, and that's probably the most important thing is that they have a goal that they're working towards. So if
And
you
when
want to
you're
make
talking,
go ahead.
sorry, please go ahead.
I was going to say, if you want to make a really complex character, you want to know the things about them that your readers will never find out, because you always want to know what your character is doing and what the next step is that they're going to take in every single situation. And even if it's like one situation, like somebody misses the bus, every single one of your characters in that novel should react differently to missing the bus if you want to make a complex cast. So
Yeah. Oh, and now I've forgotten what I was. I interrupted you, and I've forgotten what
I'm
I was going to.
sorry.
No, my fault. So sorry. I guess what I was going to get into was that question around supporting characters.
Mhm.
So with our protagonists, we have an entire novel to establish an object of desire and give them all these opportunities to show agency and overcome challenges. With our supporting cast, where we don't necessarily have as much, as you said, like on-screen time,
Mhm.
what sorts of things can you do to still add depth and roundness to a character who maybe isn't going to be with the reader for the amount of time that, say, the protagonist or even the antagonist is going to be?
Well, humor is always a good starting point. If you really don't know what to do, humor is usually, the first thing I go to. Because in one of my major series, I have a character who becomes a major player in books 2 through 4, but he only shows up in book 1 for about a paragraph. But people remembered him because of the joke he made in book 1. So you want to make something really memorable from that, first encounter. Even if your character that is going to come back later only has 4 lines or so, have them do something that is so crucially memorable that readers won't be able to forget it, whether it's an action scene or something like a scene of brutality, something that's really unique and different. Don't just have him come in, say something, and leave really quickly. Make the main character think about what they're saying and why that person's important for later.
Having written 40 books now, oh, were you getting crazy feedback?
What?
Were you getting, I got crazy feedback there for a second. Sorry. Okay. Having written 40 books now, I assume that means you've created hundreds of characters. Do you ever find yourself running out of ideas or struggling to find an aspect of a character that you haven't already done elsewhere in a different book, or do you not worry about that?
I mean, there's 6 billion people on this earth. Is one like all the others? No, every single one of us is different. So I try to make all of them as possible. It's not so much running out of ideas. It's more of I'm not connecting with the character. If I'm coming to a blank spot in my head in the plot where I don't know how to advance forward, I know that I need to know the character better, because the character and their actions, the plot will from that. They will do things that will advance the plot on their own, but they have to be provoked, and I have to know what they are, who they are, and why they're doing this. Otherwise, I don't know what the point of the story is, because the whole story revolves around the main character. If there's no good main character, there's no story.
Do you find that the unique aspects of your characters are something that emerge in the first draft, or do you find it something that you amplify and refine in later revisions?
It really depends on the novel. The series that I'm working on right now, the main character he's on point, man. Like he will go on for days and days and days and days and days if I let him. He's just an endless, flow of like information coming from him about his world and his experiences and his personality. And then I have a side project right now. The main characters do not want to talk to me, and it's like full stop, not going anywhere. So I have to try and figure out who these people are as I'm writing the first draft. Because once I'm done with the first draft, I usually know who these people are, but it takes me writing the novel to get to know. And then by books, 2 through 10 or whatever, it's easy who these people are. I know what they're doing. So it's a learning process.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I've never been a big fan of character sheets and those sorts of things either, is because I feel like you know, we're all ourselves, we're one version of ourselves on a
Mhm.
regular day, but we all become completely different people when put into complex, stressful situations, right? Like who someone is as a character emerges as they face challenges and as their life is thrown out of whack and as they enter
Mhm.
this extraordinary adventure or whatever it is that they're going on. And so I have experienced that process of in the drafting is when the characters emerge and I kind of learn who they are because I put them under pressure and they reveal themselves to me through their response to the hell I put them through.
Right. And I completely agree with that because I'm not saying characters can be unhelpful if you're a beginning writer, if you really need somewhere to start. Use them if you need to. We all have tools that we use for our first drafts. But, for me and my writing, I have to get to know these people personally. And I know that, I'll outline a thing or a plot or whatever, and then I'll have the character be put in that situation and they'll do something totally different than what I expected them to do because they're their own people. And that's always what I've wanted to put in my head. These, characters are not mine to control like some sort of arbitrary god. They're human beings and I'm going to watch them do whatever they're going to do in the situations I put them in. I'm not just gonna like control them like I'm playing The Sims or whatever, you know what I mean?
When I think of great characters, I often think of their dialogue and how distinct their dialogue is. It kind of feels like when a character has been strongly written, that you could just read a piece of dialogue and you know it's them without needing the dialogue tag because their point of view
Right.
is so unique. Could you speak a bit about that, the relationship between character and dialogue?
I think dialogue is the most important tool you have for characterization. That and inner monologue, because without the other. I want to hear a character's inner thoughts as well as see how they play out through conversation. Because if you are going to take a really good book and you take out every single descriptive moniker after the dialogue tags and just have the dialogue, I want to be able to tell who's saying what throughout the entire thing without having to guess. And because of that, you have to create a really distinctive voice for your character. You know, be how they speak, or if they, don't even speak at all, or if they, speak in a formal way or in a casual way, or if they have an accent, or sometimes just their thought process. The character I'm, right, you could pick him up, you know, out of like out of the middle of the page. Just, oh, yep, that's him. I know exactly what he's saying, why he was saying that, because dialogue, it interprets attitude, it interprets intent, and interprets purpose. All of that is very important when dealing with characterization.
As not only a novelist but also an editor who's reading other people's work, are there any big problems you see related to character, maybe particularly for beginning authors, kind of mistakes that people make
Mhm.
consistently in their portrayal or development of their characters in their novels?
Yes, I do think I see common, you know, mistakes. I guess I could say, I don't like to say the word mistake because, we're all different and we all have a different interpretation of the world. But when I'm reading a beginner's novel, usually they don't have any personality in their characters. And when I say that, I usually mean the character is super tropey, average. Let's just go with YA because it's what I know best. Average girl, average town, doesn't really have any flaws or hobbies or interests or anything. Her purpose is to like do the magic thing and fall in love with the hot guy, and that's like her only purpose. But that's not what I want when I read, and that's not what readers want either. We want to be able to see all these little, bits and pieces of who these people are, what they eat, why, they love to watch movies, why they love to dance in the rain, what car they drive. All these little details are very important because your main character is the reader's best friend from the start of the page, to the end of the book. So, you could probably list 100 things about Buffy that have nothing to do with vampire hunting, right? Like,
Absolutely.
that, yeah, you know that girl inside and out. You could probably list 100 things about Hermione Granger that have nothing to do with the plot. So, if you want to make a complex character and you want to test for it, take out every single bit of your plot and every single bit of your story and then be like, can this person stand alone? and still be interesting without all this extra stuff backing them up. Because when I read beginning writers' work, they're usually like, oh, this character is just a plot device from getting me to point A to point B and not someone I want to follow around. So that's probably the biggest issue I see in, manuscripts today.
So we've established characters need to change. They need to be likable. We want them to have an arc. But the question I get asked a lot is, okay, so I've written a book, I have a character, they start in one place, they end in another, they've grown, they've blossomed, they've learned something. But now I want to turn it into a series. And how do I handle character over 5, 10, books?
Right. Well, when thinking about starting a series, an arc for every single book for your character, of course, but there should be an overarching theme for the entire series about what your character needs to learn. So what I do is I take a certain value or truth that they need to learn in every single book and then keep including that because okay, great, you accomplished the first arc in the book, not a perfect person yet because no one on earth is perfect. And if your character is, there's a major problem with your novel because readers don't want to read about perfect characters. They want to read about flawed human beings.
Right.
So, just my biggest thing when I'm doing a novel is what's the worst thing I can put this character through? What's the worst thing that could happen to them? The worst possible way they could handle it, and then make them go through that process and come out the end a better person. So, if you need to go somewhere with your series and you have no idea, just sit about and think, what is the worst possible thing that could happen next to this person? And you will get your answer for your arc.
I think that's fabulous advice because I once heard the comic book writer Brian Michael Bendis. He's a very successful comic book writer over the last 20 years. And I was at a comic book conference maybe 15 years ago or something. And he was talking about writing comics. And he said, my job, what I get paid to do is make Daredevil's life as miserable as possible. And
Right.
it's so true. This is our job, right? We want, as readers, we want to experience characters who go through the ringer and come out on the other side. And so, as the creator of a character and as a storyteller, it's really your job to make life hell for these characters.
It is. And, I'm not here to give these people a good time. I'm sorry. That's not what we're here for. Yes, I always make sure to include humor and fun times in my novel to offset the bad times. But that's not what life is, and that's not what a good plot is. You want to be able to put your characters through the possible thing and, possibly even enjoy it as you're doing so. And then have your readers have that ultimate, shock factor of, I don't know how they're going to get out of this one every single time and up the stakes every single time. And that's what makes a hooking, plot. It just grabs them and drags them back in.
Well, any final thoughts you'd like to share with anyone watching this video? They're interested in character, they want to learn how to develop more better characters. Any tips or general advice you'd leave them with?
I think if you really want to know how to do characterization well, you need to study the people around you. Because my characterization took a step up when I really started studying human beings. And it sounds creepy, but it's not. It's like you just are learning about the human, mind and how people interact with each other because everyone's going to have a different reaction to everything. So, go out places and observe people, observe how your family interacts, observe how your friends interact, get to know people who are outside your usual circle of friends, get to know people who are unique and who are different from you. And, know the outcast, know the jock, know all these stereotypes, and then get to know the layers under these people because they're going to provide inspiration and fodder for your characters in your books.
I love it. Well, Megan, if people want to read your books, check out all the amazing stuff you have going on, where should we send them?
If you want to know more about me, you can go to www.meganlinsky.com and all my stuff is on there. So.
Fantastic. Megan, thank you so much for joining me on the Writers Craft Summit and sharing your amazing knowledge about character development. I love it. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm happy that we talked again. This is great.